Senor, I must warn you. I have seen Air Force One at least 6 times, and I can assure you that on every occasion, the President won.
You know, it didn't matter that he was the president. It's always the good guy who wins. And today, that's me.
I am an absolute huge fan of the Just Cause franchise. I mean, just go and watch my Just Cause 2 review just to see how much of a fan I am of that game. Seriously, still think it's one of the best games of the last generation. I ended up putting in a lot of time with Just Cause 3 and 4, and while I didn't appreciate them as much as 2, I'd never played the first one, mainly because I'd never seen a copy until now. And it was definitely an interesting experience. This initially had started out as just recording 30 minutes of gameplay for the channel's gameplay section, and I'm going to have to apologize for using a lot of that footage, but I ended up kind of sitting around and playing the rest of the game through in one sitting. It's not a very long game if you're just going through the plot, but it's nowhere near the polished experience the other games are. If anything, this game makes me really appreciate how far Just Cause went from the first to second iteration, and just how amazing Just Cause 2 was. And the story follows Special Agent Rico Suave, baby-faced and starting his very first mission, at least as far as we're aware. I mean, they make it seem like he's already kind of an expert, but whatever. Destabilizing the government as a special operative of the CIA, or at least a facsimile thereof. And, well, pretty much that's his whole lot. He's just there to mess up the regime because they don't play ball with Uncle Sam. He's joined by his old pal, Tom Sheldon, who is looking really, really not like Tom Sheldon, and some lady, we are led to believe, hates him, but he has history with. And basically their entire involvement in the plot is showing up in between missions to brief him, and then absolutely nothing else. So, way to go, characters. That is one thing I've noticed about this game. There isn't really a lot of people in this world. It does feel very, very barren, aside from, you know, when enemies come to wreck your day, which is a little weird. But that's kind of more or less your plot. You're not really doing all that much other than making the government very, very nervous, and then, you know, supplanting a new government in there so that America is happy with you, I guess. I mean, there's no real plot development or character here. That seems like a great analogy for what the rest of this game is, too. It feels like a very barren, almost sort of like proof of concept test for what Just Cause could end up being, but it doesn't quite make it. This is Special Agent Rico Suave. As we all know, he's a man capable of pulling unlimited numbers of parachutes literally out of his ass, and fortunately, that ability still exists in this game. However, his second signature, his awesome hook shot, not in this game. Kind of. While there is a grappling hook available in this game, it's not initially available to you. You have to actually go through 3 or 4 missions before it's given to you, and as I sort of alluded to, it's not really what it could be. If you're coming from any other Just Cause game, you know what that grappling hook can do. Makes you go up mountains, pulls enemies towards you, allows you to ascend using your amazing unlimited parachutes out of your ass ability. It is the thing that, when combined with your parachute, means you are the master of the world around you. Not so much here. First and foremost, it's not a wrist-mounted hook shot. It's actually an old-school grapple line launcher. You know, kind of like from old spy movies, which means it has some mechanical differences from what we expect from our hook shots. First and foremost, as a grapple gun, while you have unlimited ammo for it, which is like the one godsend this thing has, you have to reload between shots, which means you can't be randomly firing it off just to get out of the environment or deal with your opponents, which leads me to my second issue with this thing. It doesn't really grapple to anything. The only thing the grapple gun will actually attach to is vehicles. And in the case of something like a helicopter flying by, it would allow you to attach to the helicopter, swing under it, and miss it entirely, forcing you to basically land, turn around, hit it again, and hope you actually manage to get in the helicopter, because otherwise, spoilers, you're not getting in that helicopter. Yeah, when I said this game was more like a proof of concept test for like beta ideas for what Just Cause could be, yeah, that hook shot was definitely one of them. And the thing about Just Cause is, as I said a little bit earlier, combining the hook shot with your parachute meant that you could basically go anywhere and do anything. You were the master of the world around you. Here, you don't have that feeling. It feels like you end up running around on foot for basically the entire game because you don't really have any way to get into the air with your parachute, and even once you're there, you can like slowly, gently fall back to the ground, but there's not a lot you can do. You can kind of tow yourself with the grappling hook with a car if you manage to get into a situation like that, but even then it's very slow, it's very cumbersome, and it's wonky and glitchy as all hell. Seriously, instead of reeling you towards whatever you grapple, you just kind of sort of teleport there, and then you just sort of slowly meander towards it. It's some of the weirdest mechanics ever. It's like they didn't really understand what they were doing with this equipment. And I'm sure at least some of my problems with this game mechanically stem from the time this came out. Unlike Just Cause 2, and I apologize for bringing that up so much, but it's really hard going from 2, 3, 4 back to this. This game was not made with the PS3 and Xbox 360 in mind. While I am playing the Xbox 360 version on the Xbox One, so there's some graphical nonsense, apologies. This was originally made for the 360 and PS2. So this was actually a very, very early game as far as I can tell, which also explains why this game isn't exactly a powerhouse when it comes to the visuals or mechanics or really anything. As a greater example for just the time period this game came out, there's no autosave either, which on the Xbox 360, I honestly thought that was impossible for a game not to have autosave. But yeah, you have to manually save everything or it's gone. Now the nice thing is, in between story missions, when you complete them, it does bring up a giant menu that says, do you want to save now? So at least it's reminding you. But still, no autosave is definitely a little bit jarring nowadays to go back and play, especially on a system whose games basically made that mandatory. Another way this feels kind of really like a barren, almost completely distant relative of Just Cause is one of the other biggest things about Just Cause is destruction. How you had this giant playground to just destroy everything and make a name for yourself as the greatest, like, destructive mercenary that would topple regimes you could ever be. This game has basically zero of that. Occasionally you can meet up with some guerrilla guys and try and take down a government-controlled town or whatever, and the entirety of the destruction in that is occasionally blowing up a couple of barrier checkpoints and maybe blowing up an ammo dump for some bonus points to capture the area a little quicker. That's it. There's no sense of being the master of your environment by shaping it around you. And I think that's probably the greatest thing I can say about this, is every other Just Cause game out there is a game where you are the absolute apex predator in this environment. You are the master of your domain. You're the one who calls the shots as to who controls what area, what buildings exist in it, and how you take out enemies, and how you get around to do that. Here, you're running around on foot, occasionally getting a vehicle, sometimes shooting some guys, and then that's about it. Speaking of vehicles, while there is a vehicle drop mechanic, there isn't really a reliable way to get cars early on. There's a garage mechanic where you can save cars that you like, however it saves them in the exact condition you saved them at, so if you had the nicest car ever but it's basically on the verge of exploding like I did that one time, well, when you go and get it, that's what you're getting. Also, the garages only seem to save the vehicle at that specific garage, and once you take it out of there, it's no longer going to be there. So basically saving vehicles is entirely pointless in this game. You might as well just run to the nearest street and try and pick up whatever's there. So vehicles are, like pretty much everything here, not really well thought through or handled well. Next, we have the missions to build up your ranks within the two regimes you can sort of join and support. While I do like the idea of being just a random mercenary doing jobs for a couple of people to eventually become a trusted ally, to eventually topple the regime, that's a cool idea. Here it's bad. See, basically, any town you've captured, you can go talk to an officer, and he'll give you a randomized quest. Think Preston Gravy's Terrible Settlements from Fallout 4, and you kind of get an idea of what's about to happen. Basically, they say something's going on, go deal with it. Then you have to come back. And there's usually a time limit allotted to it. When you're done with that, you come back, you get a few points to your rating, and hopefully eventually you'll increase your rank. However, because these are all randomized and based on a very small pool of things it could be randomized for, it makes every quest seem the same. It lacks any sort of sense of weight or importance, or really anything that makes any quest stand out in this game. And I guess you could say this is sort of the idea where, going back to a very old video I made, this is a sense of Just Cause trying not to control the cool in the game. This is Just Cause embracing having awesome moments through random organic gameplay rather than stuff that they're forcing you to do because this plot mission requires X number of Y awesome moments or you're not engaged. But the thing is, there's not really much going on in this world either. So there's still no real organic cool moments and there's no contrived cool moments. There's basically just a whole lot of boring repetitive quests that ultimately end up gaining you very little. And while you do gain ranks in these organizations you can join, and while they do give you different weapons and stuff, it feels like you just have to grind way too much to get anywhere in this game. And that's not good, especially when everything just feels repetitive and bland. Likewise, the world in this game, while it's large and impressive in that regard, its overall design and conception and scope, it is abysmal. Just Cause 2 had basically every environment you could imagine short of a volcano level or like a level in space. It had every environment you could want in one giant, really well crafted, awesome map. Here, you've got a relatively large number of islands that are all jungle. And while jungle is cool and exploring jungle and finding like secret stuff is pretty cool, there's none of that. It's just a lot of trees and a lot of not being able to see where you're driving because you went off a cliff and all you can see is tree leaves. Also, speaking of that, since I just remembered, there's a weird like stunt cam thing whenever you go off a ramp that like just changes the camera to in front of your car to make it look cinematic and cool, but all it is just distracting and disorienting. Now fortunately you can turn that off, but it's not a good system to begin with. So the camera's also kind of naff in this scenario. And while I'm just in the process of complaining about everything, vehicle controls are very, very clumsy. Weapon swapping is set to the control pad, which, while that would probably work on a PS2 controller, certainly doesn't on the 360 or Xbox One controller. And this game is just incredibly buggy. I ran into weird instances of cars just driving themselves, and this weird bug where, for some reason, after completing a mission several missions later, the text from the mission still hadn't completely disappeared from the screen. It was like the most bizarre watermark ever, for no reason. As well as just general glitches and bugginess. For some reason I'd end up going through like a checkpoint to a mission, only to have my vehicle completely despawn around me, fling me through the air, and then the cutscene would continue as if everything was perfectly fine. It's the weirdest thing ever. My point is, it's not exactly the most well-made game, on top of everything else. So, at this point, I really have to wonder what about this game made me keep playing it. And honestly, it was really just exploring this world and seeing the ideas that would eventually bud into what we know as Just Cause 2, 3, and 4. You know, the games that this thing that once again feels like kind of an unfinished prototype would end up becoming. Sure, there's some fun blowing cars up occasionally when enemies try and shoot at you, but that's about it. Weirdly enough, oftentimes I'd run into allied syndicate members and stuff, and they just start opening fire on me. So, I don't know, there's not really a lot here I can recommend. There's a metric crap ton of collectibles. I remember how in Just Cause 2 there was like 3 different sets of collectibles, one for each different syndicate you could join, plus overall power-up collectibles. Here there's like a million collectibles, all tied to tiny little side quests that end up giving you minuscule amounts of points to each syndicate you can join, but that's about it. And that's like 15 different sets of collectibles. And sure, while some sets are as small as like 3 different objects, some of them are like 15, maybe 20 objects wide, and they're just scattered all over the place. And it feels like they're not really scattered in a sensible way. You find large clumps of them in one area, and then on other islands, from what I can tell, it just seems entirely barren on the map. It feels like they didn't really utilize the map as well as they could have. But that said, going back to the movement mechanics, you can't really ascend cliffs anymore because you can't grapple to them. So maybe they just understood that the only alternative was somehow getting your hands on a helicopter and trying to land on a cliffside without blowing up. I don't know, but everything about this game feels like it's only at best half-baked, and at worst, it's just unfinished and not really well thought through. And that's a damn shame because this is Just Cause, a series of amazing 3D environments where you can just run around, fly around, grapple things, experiment with the physics and tools they give you, and they give you metric crap tons of tools. Here, it really does feel like, at best, it's a game where you can steal some cars and shoot people. I hate to use the term clone, but it feels like a bad Grand Theft Auto clone at this point, and it doesn't even have the content of it. And in that regard, it makes me absolutely surprised that something like Just Cause 2 even exists after this, honestly. This kind of comes across as weird that it got a sequel, and it's even stranger that that sequel was as amazing as it was. Like I said, this game, if nothing else, makes me really appreciate where Just Cause 2 is. I always thought Just Cause 2 was an amazing game, and this game just makes me realize it even more so. The overall presentation to Just Cause is okay. As I have said, this was sort of planned out on the PS2 and 360, so it doesn't quite have the detail of, or the technical power of, say, the PS3, and it's not able to put out as many different people in this world. It really does feel barren, but it looks more or less fine. I don't really like the character designs, but again, I'm used to the later designs where they definitely sort of hammered home what these characters were, whereas here they were just one-off characters in a one-off game. What I don't necessarily like so much, however, I would have definitely appreciated some more textures on stuff, because a lot of this stuff really does feel a little untextured though. But otherwise, it looks fine, and the soundtrack is actually really damn good. It has a nice sort of Latin, Spanish flair with a lot of guitar, and it really does feel like a fun sort of Central America, Mediterranean sort of adventure romp, and I do appreciate the soundtrack. The voice acting, not so much, but, you know, overall, it's fine for what it is. Now, if you want a copy of Just Cause, the cheapest one I'm seeing right now is a PS2 copy. I'm playing the Xbox 360 version on an Xbox One, which I have digitally, which is also an option, but PS2 version is $10. Fun fact, you can get Just Cause 2 on the PS3 for less than that, and I suggest you do because it's a significantly better game. The only thing about this game that really makes me recommend it now, outside of, like me, wanting to play all of them because you're a fan, would maybe be for some sort of like historical reference, or just to see how far the series has come since this. But honestly, if you're going to jump into Just Cause, start with 2 because it's honestly the best one, or 4 or 3. Those games are at least good, and they mechanically change things up in ways that are quite enjoyable. This game doesn't have the movement mechanics that really made the series legendary. It doesn't really have very fun shooting or weapons. It doesn't really have fun vehicles. It doesn't have sort of the overall bombast that we kind of expect from the series. You just got a guy shooting in a 3D sandbox, and if that's enough for you, well, this is an option, but it's certainly nowhere near as good as the others. While I really do appreciate this series, and I think the sequel to this is absolutely amazing and has come miles ahead of what this is, and is one of the best games you can play from that time period, honestly, having seen this game, I'm not sure I could have really said making a sequel to it would have been a just cause.